All right, in this video, we're going to be breaking down the preview matchup between uh, Florida and Kentucky. It's going to be played on SEC Network at 7:45 p.m. like the UCF game was the week before. So Florida, obviously coming off of that Tennessee loss, will look to bounce back against Kentucky. And what is a pivotal game for both, not just for Florida Gators, but for Kentucky as well, because both of these teams right now are fighting for bowl eligibility. That's what this game comes down to. Now, I think Kentucky has an easier road to make a bowl game than Florida does, even if they were to somehow lose to Florida. Then I would say Florida if losing to Kentucky, because if Florida loses to Kentucky, that goes 3-4. That means they have to win three of the next five against Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State chronologically. If they beat Kentucky in this game to go to 4-3, then they just need to win two. Now, Florida State has fallen off terribly, even a bit worse than what I expected, because I predicted Florida State to go 7-5. But even if that was the case, you still got games with Georgia and Texas and LSU and Ole Miss. So that's where that Tennessee loss is almost was almost a backbreaker to Florida, looking to build upon what to go beyond what they did last season. Even though because last year they were 5-2 and they were one still managed one game short of a bowl game because they lost their final five games. They could have found themselves in the same predicament in the sense of going being 5-2 heading into their bye week before the Georgia game, but alas, it did not work out that way. And for Kentucky this year, for them has been frustrated, even been I would say maybe even for them more frustrating than what Florida's going through, because at least with Florida, a lot of people thought Florida was going to have a bad year because of how tough the schedule was. Now, I don't think the some of the opponents that were on Florida's schedule have lived up to the preseason expectations, such as Florida State, the biggest one, or UCF, because a lot of people had UCF being really good in the Big 12 this year, or in this case, Kentucky. Those are three teams I would say that have not lived that were on Florida's schedule that have not lived up to preseason expectations. Kentucky, I'm not surprised because I had predicted Kentucky to go 5-7. And what's frustrating for Kentucky fans is just there's just no consistent good play against against the SEC opponents. Southern Miss, they blew them out. Ohio Bobcats, they blew them out, but they get embarrassed by South Carolina. They put up a good showing against Georgia, but they kept making key mistakes that just cost them a chance to get what would have been Mark Richt's biggest win of his career by far. Now, he did eventually get the biggest win of his career at Kentucky by far 2 weeks later by beating Ole Miss, but it didn't really feel like either one of those teams played that well to do so. And then 2 weeks later, coming off a bye week, you lose to Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt is better than what Vanderbilt usually has been over the last 20 years, 30 years of college football, but this year they seem to be like a really good football team, and it's probably the best team Vanderbilt fans have seen since the James Franklin era before he went to Penn State. Excuse me, I was drinking water there if you heard it. So and it's not just losing to what's a pretty good Vanderbilt team. It's actually Mark Stoops' second loss to Vanderbilt in 3 years. Vanderbilt beat Kentucky in Lexington twice over the last 3 years. This year in 2022. So for Kentucky, if you can't even beat Vanderbilt on a consistent basis under Mark Stoops is right now is not too good. It doesn't look too good in the eyes of Kentucky fans because there's been a lot of tension between him and the fan base because he keeps demanding for the Kentucky fans to put more into the NIL so Kentucky can compete better. But in Kentucky and Kentucky fans are saying, dude, we're putting money into the NIL and you can't even beat Vandy at home. You've lost your last two home games to Vandy. Even if Vandy is a little bit better this year, you still have more talent than they do. So for Mark Stoops, this is an important game for him to win at Florida as it is for Florida to win against Kentucky. Because for Florida, for Kentucky, they don't necessarily have an easy schedule, but to have a fourth loss to the Gators, and they still got games with Tennessee and Texas and Louisville. There's a chance that they could miss a bowl game as well. And Auburn's not a good team, but the game between Auburn and Kentucky in my eyes is a 50-50 matchup because these are both two undisciplined teams with bad offenses and bad quarterbacks, and neither coach seems to have a feel to how to get some consistency out of their football team. So for Kentucky, it's really important that they win the Florida game coming up, because I don't see them winning on the road at Tennessee, and I definitely don't see them winning on the road at Texas. So at minimum, even if you beat Florida, that'll put you at five. Tennessee and Texas will put you at five losses, and it's likely that you could lose to Louisville as well to have you at six. So you're on thin ice in terms of bowl eligibility, just like Florida is. I said, except I think Florida has a tougher schedule, like I've said before. So uh, on Florida, Graham Mertz is out. Montrell Johnson is probably out. So DJ Lagway and Jaden Ball and Jacoby Jackson will be leading the offensive backfield uh, behind the trenches for the Gators, and maybe Trayon Webb could come back, but we'll see. What is a bright side for having DJ Lagway start is the fact that I don't think he'll be overwhelmed by the fact that he has to now have starter reps in an actual game, considering he's gotten game action throughout the whole year. Granted, in a more rotational sense because of the multi-quarterback system, and I would like to see him do a better job of protecting the football. He's fumbled the football a couple of times. He's thrown 4 interceptions, and I think that's more so him trying to make a play that isn't there, being that he's a freshman and he's still learning on how to play the sport, and he's you know trying to get himself comfortable. But I think the fact that he has had game reps throughout the season, the game should be slowed down for him much sooner than a guy being a first year starter as a redshirt freshman or a true sophomore. So for DJ, I expect a good performance. I expect an efficient play by him, and I do expect Florida to win this game. I had predicted Florida to beat Kentucky early in the season, because I did not believe that Brock Vandegrift for Kentucky was that good, and I didn't think Kentucky was going to have a good passing attack. Now, what surprised me is that their rushing attack is not what I thought it would be. Uh, 300, 380 yards for running back name Demi Sumo Karnbai. I don't know how. I apologize for messing up your name. And then there's a big drop off there to Jamarian Wilcox. The Demi guy has 380 rushing yards, and then Jamarian Wilcox has 191. So I think that there's been a little bit of a drop off in the Kentucky run game. They don't look as good. The offensive line is bad in pass protection. They've given up 16 total sacks, um, as opposed to Florida, who's only given up 4. Now, granted, DJ Lagway and Graham Mertz have avoided some pressures and have been able to move up in the pocket. DJ obviously being more athletic, and Graham can, run beyond the line of scrimmage and provide more of a dimension to the offense that the defense has to prepare for. But the passing attack for Kentucky has been bad. Brock Vandegrift only has 5 touchdowns the whole year. Both DJ and Graham, before Graham's injury, were already at that threshold uh, before the Tennessee game. And for Brock Vandegrift, 59.8 completion percentage. He's just not been that good. I mean, he can scramble around a little bit, but it has not done well for him to do so, because only 60 carries for 93 yards, and that's including some of his scrambles. And that probably means he's also running around into quarterback sacks that may not be there, because in college football, sacks take away from the team's rushing yards instead of the passing yards, which I've never liked, but well, that's another topic for another day. Brock Vandegrift has shown why he was a backup at Georgia, why he couldn't beat out Carson Beck and Stetson Bennett as in the quarterback competitions. He just hasn't been that good. Now, of course, defensively under Mark Stoops, Kentucky is expected to be pretty stout. Now, they didn't look stout against Vanderbilt. Some people, Kentucky fans, are saying, yeah, the score looks close, but if you watch the game, it didn't appear as close as the final score would indicate. But they do have some good defensive players. They have Jordan Lovett, Jamin Dumas Johnson, Zion Childress, Derek Jackson, Deion Walker, who is expected to be a first-round defensive tackle in the NFL draft next year. They have J.J. Weaver, who leads the team in quarterback sacks with 4. So they have good football players on the defensive side of the ball, which is no surprise under Mark Stoops at Kentucky, but the offense has been lacking. And I think Florida's defense has improved the last 2 games, and I think they should have a good day rushing the quarterback against Brock Vandegrift, because the Kentucky's offensive line cannot perhaps protect that well. They're giving up 16 sacks, like I've said. They don't really run the ball that good. So I think this is going to be a low-scoring defensive football game for the Gators and Kentucky. But I still have the Gators winning this game. I predicted them to beat Kentucky in in August, a few weeks before the season started, and I'm going to stick with that because Kentucky has been what I kind of said that they were. It's just that they had a nice big win against Ole Miss, and I thought they would be heading into the Vanderbilt game 2-3 instead of 3-2, and I did predict them to beat Vanderbilt, so I kind of had them heading into the Florida game with a 3-3 record. Just a loss to Ole Miss and a victory over Vanderbilt. That's really about it. That's the only difference. As per Florida, I had them going. I had them 3-3 heading into the Kentucky game as well, except with a loss to UCF and a victory over Miami, and it was a blowout loss to Miami and a victory over UCF. So both of these teams are right around where I had predicted where they would be at. It's just I was just one game off where I picked one team to win a game that they weren't supposed to. But all in all, I think Florida should win this game, and I think it's a critical matchup, a critical game for both Napier and Mark Stoops, because if Mark Stoops loses to Florida, I don't think he'll necessarily be on the hot seat concerning what he has done for the program. But there's a good chance he could be that could be the beginning of what could eventually lead to the end of Mark Stoops' time in Kentucky. And for Billy Napier, if he loses to Kentucky, I don't see him making it past the bye week. And quite frankly, even if he does beat Kentucky, I still don't want him to make the bye week, to make it past the bye week. I think Florida just needs to move on from Billy Napier unless he does something crazy and gets an 8-4 record at the end of the season. But I don't see that happening. Just not really. Both of these coaches are not really in a favorable position heading into this game, and the loser is going to hear it from their fan base when the game is over. But I still predict Florida to win. I'll make it. I'll say 24-21. Low scoring defense. A rather low scoring game, and probably a back and forth matchup because I think these teams are pretty much even. So that's it. Thanks for listening.